And here we are again in the what the hell to do in the Pacific. Well, anyway, the Axis chose to take the first action as opposed to the Russians so that they could grab this resource hex. That's, you know, the main limitation on the Russians is the resources. The Germans took an air move, in part to move more planes up here. Got a lot of crap coming this way, older planes, a lot of fighters. Fair amount of older bombers. I'm sending Swedes, Finns out there. The main reason for the air move was I knew I needed to bomb Gibraltar before I did anything. Now I could do a combined and do that, or even a straight land. But I also wanted to get planes moving everywhere, and probably want to get this one moving too. And I had some strategic bombing opportunities. I fired the last rocket off at London. That didn't do anything, but I was able to launch a couple of planes, a seaplane and another long-range strategic, try to hit the oil reserves. That didn't actually do anything. One screw-up by the Axis. I brought Chile into the war, and that pissed Argentina off. I would rather have Argentina than Chile. The problem is Argentina's over in the Japanese camp, and Chile was in the German camp. Germany had the money. I didn't really look at the chart, but I thought, well, maybe Chile somehow will give me enough, some kind of trigger that I can bring Argentina in as a German ally. I just don't think it does me much good as a Japanese ally, because they're not likely to be supporting a land war in South America too terribly. But the problem is, I don't know what to do with the Japanese again, you know? I mean, I have a bigger, stronger fleet right now than the US does. Parity is going to be achieved as soon as this recharges, though, basically. Land situation, there's rain up here in the north. I doubt that I'm going to get much progress there. There's rain down here. I moved better bombers into place with the hope of trying to crack that. I doubt that I'm going to be able to move things there. Here, you know, this is just too tough to budge. I can maybe move a hex somewhere, but that's about it. And then one other opportunity remains that's possible to want to try, which is the invasion of Truk. Last turn that would have been awesome. This turn maybe not so much because the fleet's available. But, you know, my devotion to that would require airstrikes, etc. I think I'm going to do an air move, see if I can loosen anything up and find, you know, a single place where I actually really want to do something. It's what it kind of comes down to. Unfortunately, the air units I'd want to use, say this one, which can reach Truk and bomb it, could also be useful at hunting some of the convoys. But the Allies are getting so many convoys rebuilt. They threw, I don't know what they got. They got 5 here and another 5 over there. That I'm not sure that I can just attrition the convoys away. The U.S. just needs to have one line of a single convoy in each space. That's hard to fight because they can spread out and do multiple paths into somewhere. This was supposed to rebase somewhere. God knows where, though. Got ships flying out all over the place to try to avoid the Japanese patrols that were out last time. So, yeah, I will, I'll probably do the air move and just see what I loosen up for next turn. I also really ought to worry about this thing. It's being a real annoyance, and if more of them accumulate, but I have no troops down there. So I took the Russian turn and they just moved forward. But now I'm in the hell of trying to figure out the naval campaign again. Beyond what I've already talked about, I have a fair idea of things I might want to do with the U.S. With the Brits too, but the Brits are taking a combined move because I wanted to move this one Canadian infantry to try to help cover the defense to Gibraltar, because I just don't think Cadiz is that important. And I may move if I can do a combined, I may move the Spaniards out of there too, but I probably can't afford that. I don't know. I can't make that decision until I do all my moves on the board that I want to do for the turn and figure out the things I want to do. Like, do I want to do an invasion? Well, then I've got a combined move, right? But among the things that I'm trying to figure out that I want to do is, do I want, and I've already spent one naval move, do I want to try an invasion, you know, maybe with this, or land some troops in Borneo or something? And it's just, there's such a tangled mess, because to do that, I have to try to make sure, can I support their supplies? Because otherwise, why the hell am I going in? And an invasion isn't going to work that way, but maybe a transport would. And then, you know, are these guys in range that they can get there if that starts getting really disputed? The Japanese have already disputed it, but that plane can't be used for search anymore, so the Japanese will have to keep throwing units in. So am I willing to risk that? And if I lose this, I'm screwed, right? I don't think there's another convoy around. There's this one. I could try to slip that through. But it's just such a tangled mess of what things I'd need to do to get to there. Now, that may be an overreach. That may be a sign of that. Except that, you know, the same tangled mess kind of applies to moving into the Marianas, and if I so desired wanting to take one of these islands, which I don't, I can't see any point to it, or if I wanted to reinforce the Philippines, anything I do, I have to try to figure out, will I be able to get supply there? Will I be able to hold it? You know, what is the cost when I put my ships out and expose them like that? It's just such a chaotic set of, you know, this manifold that I'm looking over for trying to figure out what kind of moves are reasonable compared to the land operations, you know, and compared to, say, something like Victory in the Pacific. And that's what really just stymies me so much on the naval. I also have to work in that random turn-in situation. And what will I want to do in other impulses? What will I be forced to do in other impulses? How terribly, you know, will I expose something, and will it maybe get lopped off because something else gets threatened? Very go-like thinking in that, but it's just such a complicated mess and a hairball that you have to unravel to try to figure out, can I do anything? That it is just a nightmare for my analysis paralysis. This game is so bad for it. It's very rich. And to some extent, you know, getting used to doing a certain pattern. So, you know, for example, there was no big deal. I moved 2 naval movements. I moved the U.S. ships out of Truk. I don't want to get them caught there again. I kind of like to do something with this huge battleship fleet. It's not all battleships. And this one carrier, but I'm not sure what. And this, you know, might be the answer, except there's nothing really there that I want to get out of the way, except maybe the engineer, which can go on board a regular ship. And only really makes sense if I'm supporting an invasion. And then, okay, so I've got this guy. He could invade. What can I invade? Well, it turns out it's hard to see the sea lines. Oh, actually, I can come down here for 1, 2 to here. There's nothing really worth invading here except Java. And I'd be hitting bad terrain in Java if I come from this side. So I'd want to go to here, 3, the South China Sea. But now I'm in a horrible box to be invading from. So, wow, that's just too far, right? But it's not too far if I want to land troops down here in Brunei and have enough forces to try to take Borneo that way. And Borneo would be a hell of a prize. There's, what, 2 oil there. And that's what I want to do. I want to strip the oil from the Japanese. That's what, you know, they can make the most. That's what's going to hurt them the most if I can take it from them. So without taking the Dutch East Indies or cutting their supply, which is always a crapshoot, I don't know what to do. Well, I'm hunting this ship, which shouldn't be here, because that's this sea zone. So we'll move this here and we'll move this here instead, I guess. Right? 1, 2, 3. See, it's very hard to see what these lines are for me. And so I had them in here because I thought this was part of this sea zone. No, it's this jagged line or something. I don't know. Anyway, and maybe there's a line up here somewhere because I don't see one here. So this sea, yeah, I don't need a ship here at all. God, I don't know what these Japanese ships are doing. I don't need them at all. I thought I needed a fleet down here. Well, wait, maybe I need one here. Where's the line? The line's here. These ships. I don't know. I really don't know. But I've got these resources here, so I'll have to refigure what the U.S. is doing because the Japanese are in stupid locations. You know, because it's so hard to read the damn map. I certainly could offload stuff from Batavia, but I don't want to. However, I do want to pull the oil from here, which works out to be 4, and the Malaysian goods, which brings us to 6. I don't need the 8 that I have assessed there, but I don't know why I was down there except, well, I do know why. There was no good reason except that I couldn't see what the board expresses. So I wasn't able to pull all the resources out, but I had too many ships allocated. This game pisses me off sometimes. Okay, not just sometimes. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to do with the U.S. You know, I just don't know because I've got this totally chaotic situation, and you know, I could send some ships out here. Maybe they'll sink these. But what the hell does that do to me? All right, well, this sub can go out this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There. That's no problem. It's got some danger because of that plane, because the Japanese can now respond. I could actually use this as an interception, but interceptions look like a bad idea. They don't get you far enough out. So I can hope that I make it through a round of this. Otherwise, well, then the Japanese are screwed if they can't get there, because I only have 1 reserve ship available. I'm too spread thin. And then I've got ships out here that are doing me no good whatsoever. I don't know why they're out there. They've been out there all game. I put ships out all over the place because I wasn't quite sure what they were going to do early in the game. Some of them, this one was probably the remainder of the convoy heading out, but it doesn't really make sense because this is where I'd want my convoy to run, so it was probably just partially connected. So yeah, I don't know. I settled on some crappy piddling around. I pushed 1 convoy out here. Now I'm like just out of counters that I can use for convoys. There's no counter mix limit. You can make your own, which is why I'm using days of decision counters here. But essentially, there aren't enough 2s, there aren't enough 1s, there aren't enough 1s and 2s to stretch the supply lines I want to have. I took a couple piddling little sub-attacks, try to see if I can catch some of the Japanese shipping. That didn't work. And I shifted some forces around, and you'll see I've got some transports. I sent Marines in here. I don't need Marines there, but, you know, I got what I'm looking at is if I can clear the Philippines somehow, in some way, and I don't have a real good route to that, then I can start shifting my support upward, possibly to a liberation of China, but certainly to making Formosa a more important base, or just running out of the Philippines. Either of those works fine, but right now I'm just too far away to really exercise the power that I want out where it'll hurt Japan the most. It feels insufficient, but, you know, I mean, I could get my fleets out here and everything. The problem is I cannot get a convoy out there. And the British convoy is over here, not helping. it'll take me a couple turns to recycle, and I'll never remember. That's the problem. If I don't cover the board with convoys, I'm not going to succeed in getting convoys where I need them. So, for example, last turn, I didn't shift this convoy to a more usable location. Why? In part because I don't know when the turn's going to end. And it's a big deal. You get caught out at sea at a point where the opponent can react, and you get screwed. And now, some of that makes sense in the sense of the idea that, you know, not knowing when the turn's going to end and being susceptible to some sort of attack on you while you're in transit, etc., is a real sensible alternative, you know, to whatever you might have otherwise. But it makes it very, very difficult to make the decisions, because you know if you choose the right impulse to do it, you can sleaze a little bit of security there. So, for example, U.S. troops can go through the Bismarck Sea right now, but I can't put a convoy there without risking something. I've got one, but I can't have one there without risking something. I also pulled up some of these navies, but there's just so little I can do. Establish my convoys out here a little better. That's risky because, you know, the Germans can intervene with them. But in order to do so, they got to run the gauntlet of this, and I'm counting on them not doing that. Still, had I been wise, I would hold off till another impulse. The problem, of course, is, what if I got to do something other than a naval move on that other impulse? You know, what if some opportunity comes up and I lose that opportunity because I need to establish my supply routes? And that's what just kills me in this game, is that whole linking of what ifs. You know, I mean, it's as hard as making the decision of how the hell will I move out of the place I'm in to, say, the Pacific Northwest, and can I do it safely? What if I lose my job? This, that, and the other. You know, trying to figure out the different what ifs in this game is too much like real life for me. It panics me in a way that games don't generally tend to. And that's probably a good sign of it as a simulation, but it's just pure chaos when I'm trying to untangle what I should be doing. The Axis side combined moves around. The Italian Navy shifted out to the Western Med. I don't know what I used my land movement for. I did an airstrike to try to knock this out. I think I was counting on a land attack and probably didn't do a land move. I don't care. Germans took Gibraltar. There's still Spaniards in Cadiz, though. I've got to take at least one more turn before Spain actually falls. Shifting ground troops eastward, they did a ground operation. Japan did a combined operation, 2 naval moves. One swung here into the Solomons. This is the only supply route going in, because I also moved into the South China Sea and knocked that supply route out. It's an iffy supply route. We're just talking about the Indian oil source, which is not very good. Actually, it's not from India. The oil itself is from Burma. But I don't really have a way to get oil into India right now any more than I do anywhere else. The British Navy pushed back to Australia largely, and the Japanese, most importantly, protect their supplies from here, which is very important, although I should have them shifted differently. I should only have 4 ships here, 6 ships maybe. And I'll figure that out at some point, maybe. So I do have the counter mix to support that. But yeah, the only other opportunity is the invasion of Truk. I've been toying with that idea. The Japanese still have, you know, if I could have done it before while the ships were all flipped, it would have been impressive. Now, it'll just scare them out of there. Now, if I've got both the Marianas and the Solomons covered, it forces them to kind of flee in this direction, which is not the way they want to go. But it just doesn't seem like it's worth the amount of effort to try to get it off. Although I did do an airstrike earlier in the turn for that. Tried to get some movement over on the Russian front. With the German planes heading over to Russia, I'm basically looking at focusing pretty heavily on trying to destroy Russia in the meantime, and maybe do what I can navally to strangle Britain completely. You know, if it comes down to just the U.S. pretty much holding out, the game is over. The game is over once you take both maps. So then the question becomes, okay, you know, the U.S. production is not high enough to take on everybody in the world. So I probably stop once that starts really looking like it's an obvious situation. But right now it's still not. You know, Britain is still fairly potent. If I can get those supply lines in, it cancels out a lot of what the Axis powers have. And Russia has so much oil stockpiled, she can essentially be a match for Italy right now in terms of production points. In terms of other things, well, you know, Russia's host. There's no question about that. And I toyed with that, the idea of Russia trying to, you know, come to some sort of separate peace with the Axis powers. And they can do that in this game. They could actually, because of the days of decision playing going on, they could actually go anti-allies. But how much possibility really is there for them to gain anything? First of all, Japan's not going to give up the territory they have. Russia's not going to, or Germany's not going to give up much, if any, of the territory they have. They want to keep Europe. So that leaves, that leaves the Russians with kind of maybe one outlet, which is down into India. You know, conceivably they could come out in the positive side in terms of faction-wise. Their faction's still on the board, at least. I think if that move were made, you can pretty much say goodbye to the Allies, though, because then the Italian army can move into here. The Russian army can cut through Afghanistan in order to attack India. They'd have to fight in Afghanistan, but you know, there's just not enough British troops or Commonwealth troops to defend against yet another frontier. I had to really kind of stretch things thin to defend against the Malaysian side. Oh yeah, Borneo. Japanese took used an airstrike to take Brunei, so North Borneo is going to be falling pretty soon too. I think I could probably write it off at this point. You know, it's really just kind of a. I wasn't sure that the Allies could even be knocked down this far potentially, but. This is a point where I don't think they can recover from. German production is going to be able to do a great deal of damage to the Brits. The Brits are having real trouble getting anything built at all. The US pushes its fleet out into the Solomons. This is not necessarily wise, because the Japanese fleet has an opportunity to, say, cut here and here, and thus cut off any real chance of supplies reaching Truk. But supplies to Truk are less important at this point because the fleet's out of there. So, you know, unless we're looking at like an invasion of Samoa, which could happen, but I don't think it's plausible. These guys with no movement allowance, I'm giving them 4-4s or something like that. I don't know, because they're transports. They should be real slow. Are these the slow ones? Yeah, these are the really expensive ones that I shouldn't have, because I don't know why I built it, but they're like pre-ships in flames or something, and just wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4. I could get myself here, but I couldn't invade from that box because there's a not allowed there, essentially. And it's pretty tough to do it. So, yeah, we're not going to see an invasion there. But we could well see an invasion of Truk, an invasion of Kwajalein, although that's really heavily defended. I don't think we'll see that. So I don't know how much I'm really risking here, except potentially the supply line running up here, which isn't doing me a whole hell of a lot of good. If I can't maintain that supply line, Truk isn't terribly helpful to me. Truk is helpful because it allows me to push forces against Japan. Weather got bad again. Well, not terrible, but rain in the Arctic and the northern monsoon. Japanese say, I think I mentioned, moved everything into the Solomons. That did not work out well. They got caught piecemeal. Hit first with a surface combat, then there was an air combat after that, Again, with the major force that was in the 3 column as opposed to the 2 column, they ended up aborting everything after 2 rounds of combat. They had numerical superiority if they could bring everything to bear, but they really couldn't. Lost a couple of ships, bunch of planes. The U.S. lost planes too. But I guess probably the bigger thing is they took more damage over here. It's not that big a deal, again, because their force pool is full, so they can afford to play the attrition game. The U.S. or their force pool is empty. The U.S., on the other hand, has a humongous force pool of ships available to them. So, you know, every loss that's taken is something that they can't rebuild, you know, that is going to cost them in terms of total Navy. On the other hand, though, it would be nice not to lose my Navy because it's going to cost to rebuild it anyhow in terms of just resources. Resources I could be spending on bombers, on bringing Mexico into the war, whatever. Over here, the Germans finished Spain off. They're gone and crossed over here. The Italians succeeded this time on a lower odds attack on Malta, took it, knocked the fleet back to Tunis. The Brits have a real problem. They're out of supply now. Remember, these are Vichy French markers. So by cutting, well, no, they're not quite out of supply yet. But they're soon to be out of supply, which is problematic because the German army is going to cross in, grab North Africa. The possibility of seizing Vichy territories is also available. Get the resources there. I don't know if I need them or not, but honestly, I probably don't want to for the simple reason that there's no rail net going up that way. I would have to have sea control. And by the time I have that, I've won the game pretty much. You know, if I can have my, well, I don't know. It's hard to tell because Cape St. Vincent here, if I can get control of that, and with the Italian Navy coming out into Gibraltar, sort of have, you know, that. There's the problem of Sardinia. It's not really a big threat, but I may need to make an invasion and try to oust them from there. That's kind of a big expense to do for a one resource space, but one resource may be better than I can get anywhere else. I'm not really getting any traction over here. I'm not, you know, going to be able to break through against the Brits. And moving some more units, you know, pushing into France. Now comes the big question for the Germans of, do they really want to do land operations? Do they want to focus on Germany or on Russia, especially during the winter, you know, or do they want to see what they can do against the Brits and the Americans navally? Especially with support from the Italians. That could be really impressive. Italy is a huge source of oil right now. They can actually afford to fund their navy and maybe even, you know, fund actions by the Germans in terms of recuperating units. If it comes down to a showdown in the North Atlantic, though, I mean, look at what the Brits have. America's not giving them much, but the British Navy is just humongous. And you know, I can't really contest, I couldn't really contest the Mediterranean with that big navy without leaving things open. We saw before where the Germans got close to parity if I sent that navy down into the Med. But now with it all centralized in Britain itself, wow, that's not going to be easy to budge. Some important events over here for the Axis. First of all, we concentrated our air power and the naval guns and actually managed to take this finally. It was only a 4-to-1 attack, could have gone very badly, but now we have the northern Philippines and we can turn back. Now the US has reinforcements down here though. They added that division, and that's a strong division. So taking the southern Philippines is going to be tough, but hey, whatever. We had gotten things flipped, so we were like, well, let's go for it. So that was actually a land move because we were also hoping, using artillery, etc., to bust our way through. We have a single flipped Russian unit, but that's still way more strength than we can face. If we could flip the other unit, it would go well. Germany took a naval move. I don't know what the hell Italy did. I think they took a naval move too. Kicked some subs out and didn't really succeed. But the German subs slipped out of Bray into the Bay of Biscay. They were not caught, and they took down the British convoy fleet. So Britain's getting nothing again this turn, you know, other than whatever they produce, which is like 2. Actually, it should be, no, yeah, it's just the 2. I thought they had an oil well, synthetic oil. Good luck building that now. And since I was doing a naval move to get the fleet, I had to pull subs out of 2 places. Well, I sent the German fleet up here into the North Atlantic, and I took down the U.S. Convoy as well. That wasn't as big a deal. First of all, there's another route coming down this way. There's supplies coming up from Africa. So the biggie is taking out the Bay of Biscay. Now, these guys could be hit, but the danger, of course, is if the British fleet moves out of England, then they need oil. You know, eventually they have to unflip. So there's a real limit to how much of that huge fleet I want to commit. On the other hand, maybe I want to commit it all and see if I can catch this. But again, if I do that, I can always base in America and use American oil, of which there's a near unlimited supply. Doesn't look that big, but there's like 100 there, at least. It's no longer 200, and be able to come back out. But then I'm very far from what I need to protect, and it becomes harder to get out to a far box. Of course, I can use air power to help my search numbers, but I still need to include the units that I expect to do the fighting, which means if they're in a low box, they may not be able to actually work against the subs. Anyway, that was a pretty devastating blow against the Brits, and the turn goes on with a Russian impulse. And it's funny because I spent the Allied turn setting up these nice convoy routes. I was getting, I don't remember what it was, somewhere, I think I had 12 in here, so I was getting a significant amount of supply coming through. Well, all that's left that's still floating is 3 of that 12. Most of it was sunk. Some of it's in the damaged box now, which will be a little faster to recuperate, but just as expensive to repair. And the turn ends on the Russian impulse. They moved some planes forward. I think they're becoming so dispirited after having seen the German air power reduced. Now they're seeing a thickening of that German strength and planes coming in their direction. They don't believe that they can fall quickly. It may take 3-4 years to carve out this Russian territory with heavy German and well, the Japanese aren't getting anywhere, but with heavy German and maybe Italian commitment in these directions. But the possibility of Russia being on the right side of things is becoming lower and lower, and I'm really toying with the idea of coming in against the Allies instead. That'll take some repositioning. It doesn't help me if I stay as a communist, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I save the country, but I don't end up on the winning faction, right? So, on the other hand, I will be most assuredly the junior partner if I end up as a member of the fascist side of things, which means, you know, maybe I'm willing. We'll see. I'll do some die rolls to see how they flex with this, because it's possible that they will simply accept their chances of survival are greater as the other ideology, you know, and try to grab India and try to create an Asiatic socialist empire. The other side of thing, the other possibility is they could demand that Germany start converting them start forcing them using, I don't think it's New Order, is it? New Order is what you play on yourself. There's something that forces you to play New Order. I don't remember. I'd have to look it up. It might be Government Falls. I think it's Government Falls, but it might be New Order. Something allows you to push the other guy, to force him to push out of his alignment. And that's what I kind of said is the requirement for changing the government on one of the major powers. And if I do that, after a peace, then the Soviets can push themselves into some form of dictatorship and then actually align with it. But potentially, they might even join just as a socialist nation. Anyway, before I babble too much more, let's make a roll for the partisan table and see what we're looking at. Norway, UK, Hungary, Iraq, Yugoslavia is one worth checking. 1, 2, 3. Looks like I have some chance on a 1. Nope. And Australia, Canada, China. I already have one in China. 1, 2. Wow. All right, China's on an 8. I get 1. So we're going to see another partisan in China. And I don't know where that's going to go. It can either go into Shanghai and take away a factory, or it could go into their only 1-point resource hexes. This was so clear in a way the best place to land. But elsewhere, I think I'll probably be taking the factory away because there's an excess of resources. There's not an excess of factory power outside of Japan, so that forces those extra resources to be shipped for whatever it's worth. I actually could probably up Japanese production capabilities if I'm correct about what I think here. Here we're at like 21, here we're at like 28, so I actually have some extra room, but some of that extra room is my oil and I need that. Okay. Anyway, we'll get to production. Russia surrendered conditionally to everyone, Germany, Japan, and Italy, but we didn't get to the German surrender, and there isn't combined war aims, so each country has to respond in turn, which means the Russians are going to have to surrender again to Germany specifically. Peace with Italy. Italy is going to withdraw back to Persia. That'll give Russia a chance to get through Afghanistan and hit India. Peace with Japan, shit, I haven't really decided, but I think I'm going to give them this resource hacks and pull back. See, the problem is this is actually a pretty good defensive line for the Japanese, so I'm not sure I want to give them the territory back. And likewise with the Germans, I don't think I want to give any territory back at all. But for the Italians, this territory is just a resource which Russia really needs. So probably we're going to draw the lines where they stand for these other surrenders, for whatever that matters. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to continue. I was considering calling the game, and then I did the production for this turn, and that doesn't convince me in any other way, in any greater way, that the Allies have any chance. But there's a lot of game left to play before things are completely done. Not completely hopeless. The question is, you know, if this was a game where the Axis was losing, and you had, you know, the invasion in Normandy and the Russian counterattack. Would it really be fair to call the game at this point after, you know, the Axis has had all its fun? Well, it's not like the Allies are going to have much fun anyway. The Axis has had its fun, and now it'll get to have more fun. So I just don't know. There's a fair-sized U.S. Navy, enough to challenge the Japanese, but the Japanese have made some significant gains over here. These extra forces are going to be able to come down and start coping with the Chinese problem, and Britain's certainly going to lose India once Russia jumps in the war. I don't see Britain holding out much longer on their own. They've got no production. They're down to, you know, 3 oil left. As long as the Germans can keep interdicting on the sea, and, you know, that's a crapshoot every time, but a huge Italian Navy based at Gibraltar seems to sway things. Now, then there's the question of, okay, well, maybe I want to be able to assess the relative value of everyone's losses, but the acceptance of a Russian peace, and with Russia kind of joining the Axis, at least that's the intention here, to be able to expand and gain possible additional victory spaces. They're not going to get enough to make them in the running at all, but they won't lose the game in the way the Commonwealth is likely to lose the game, getting knocked out. So I'm kind of tending towards I should probably just call this, even though I spent, you know, an hour setting up the production and figuring it out. But when it comes down to it, the Commonwealth was able to build 4 convoy and an infantry. The U.S., a bunch of ships, but the Japanese come close to matching it. Same 4 SCSs and 1 carrier to 6 SCSs and 4 carriers. Okay, that's not really a match. But then I've got the Italians with 4 SCSs and 3 subs. The Germans, who did not build, they built 1 SCS. They're out of ships. Their force pool's out of play. And to some extent, that becomes one of the sillinesses of the game, is if you do stretch it beyond this and you don't have, maybe America in Flames includes more German ships so that they can actually go after the U.S. But without that, it's going to be actually a tougher slog than you'd think, because what the Germans have to do is they have to, and the Italians for that matter, they don't have a hell of a lot left either, they have to fight an attrition battle to try to win. And then it's going to come down to the crapshoot. And this is one of the problems with a multiplayer, 2-sided game with victory conditions assigned to the different players, is that a lot of the decision as to who wins is going to be in the hands of the losers, right? So the U.S. could commit their Navy all against Japan, and then Britain is going to fall. Or I could commit, which would be harder, all my new builds, or maybe some of my other stuff, into Britain, and then Japan's going to have an easier time winning over on their map. And then, you know, what does it come down to? Well, it comes down to, you know, okay, which map actually has the most valued resources on it, and who gained what, you know, our race into India and everything. And that could be all very interesting, but because each player, because one of the players doesn't really have a stake in who's winning, i.e., well, not just one, the allied players don't really have a stake in who ends up winning, but they may have, you know, reasons to commit one way or another that have nothing to do with sort of the inner balance of the play. So it becomes kind of a kingmaker type exercise. That's always been one of my gripes about trying to convert a 2-sided game into a multiplayer thing, other than just, hey, it's team play. Now, here it's really silly because the team play, hey, the Russians just defected, you know? But given the nature of the 3-sided game over in Days of Decision, I'm not too bothered by that. And I'm not too bothered by the Western Allies racing against the Soviets. Because in a sense, they do have alternative paths here. This isn't a matter of the Soviets having any place in this in the end game victory. The end game victory is going to be an Axis victory. It's just a question of whether Russia survives and gains. You know, they're not going to gain against the Axis. Anyway, I suppose I'll pause away. I'm probably going to break this, though. I think there's at least a few more interesting things to be seen, and let's just keep going. So, the Russian impulse, they started things off. Not much they could do. During the Axis impulse, Italians pulled out a little bit here. Japanese took a big naval act, I think just pure naval, slid into a couple of places preparing for airstrikes on Truk. If these ships don't pull out, they've got problems. If they do pull out, well, they've got a route out through the Solomons. I've got a big U.S. fleet, and this is part of a whole bunch of carriers coming here. That's going to be a pain in the ass for the Japanese come fairly shortly. So what we're kind of looking at is the possibility of an invasion, and we've got a force prepared to do so. Those are just infantry, but they're on that super expensive amphibious transport that I bought for some reason. The bad weather prevented a lot of other stuff from happening. We'll see what the Allied reaction is. They don't really want to get their convoys out yet, because, again, you know, it's the wrong time of turn, and there's German subs looking. Not a lot for the Germans to do. They did kind of a ground action and shifted some stuff there. I probably got some planes I want to move to. I get like three aircraft actions. I don't think I took any of them. The Allies pull out of Truk with the Navy. There's more here than I thought. It's going to take a couple of flips to have any chance of taking this. Some of it here for a showdown down in the Bismarck Sea. The rest pulled into the Marshalls, and you can see how potent that U.S. carrier fleet is. That's what the Japanese are going to be facing, and they're outnumbered overall. Not by a tremendous amount, but a little bit. And then another battle wagon fleet coming out down here. Seem to have not activated these for some reason or another. Could I have gotten them in here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, they would have. I'm debating because I could use a couple of light ships in this squadron as well to absorb hits. I have a lot of lights over here. They don't really add a lot to the damage capacity. Okay, the Germans open up with some strategic bombing. They get a couple of hits, which I'm marking with these. Here they actually got like 3 hits, but only 1 could count. Because there's only 1 factory there. And these count against Britain's production, not their capacity for production. Which means it doesn't matter whether or not I actually use these factories. I'm going to lose 2 production points from whatever minimal production I get. And I guess that's part of that's to repair damage, even if those factories weren't necessary. They're all operating. It's just, you know, whatever. However you want to hand wave to explain that. Italians didn't do a hell of a lot. I don't remember what it was. It involved, certainly some of it involved moving up towards Tunisia. It was something else, though. Oh, they had to get a fleet into place, a convoy, so that they have Tunisian supply. Because until I clear this road here, I don't have supply. Now, the Brits are no longer in supply, because the rail line out here no longer works. The Germans have cut that. And then over here, the Japanese went in big in the Bismarck Sea. They tried to set off that invasion. In the Bismarck Sea, they failed and had to withdraw. The Americans got a surface combat against half the fleet and did enough damage that I didn't want to stick around for another shot at that. I didn't really have that kind of overwhelming superiority I'd like for a naval battle, even if I could combine the two. And I'm moderately outnumbered either one alone. Americans are in a better box. Didn't seem too important. I didn't get any airstrikes successful on the Truk, so that has not been retaken. This fleet is just scary. But, you know. America's throwing all their weight against the Japanese. The feeling is really the British fleet should be able to handle the Germans, and maybe even the German-Italian fleets combined. There's some American fleet presence here, some backup back here, mainly cruisers. It's not like I'm completely abandoning it, but all the reserves have been going into the Pacific. I feel like that's where I have the most capability to really push one of the Axis powers using boats, which is what the US has the most of. That's what the Allies have the most of, by far. The turn ends on a very unlikely note. The one space after the Western Allies went. Not a lot happened here. I did manage to reestablish some convoy rating, so I'm getting some British shipment in. It's only 10 points, which covers 8 from here and 2 from here. These guys are pumping into that 8. Just a different route to get through things. That's all she really wrote there. For the US, they actually reinforced over here in the Solomons a chance of the Japanese slipping through and disrupting our supply to truck. Not that it's vital now that the fleet's not stationed there. But over here, I was planning on an invasion of Guam, and that's not going to happen. So I've got to spend oil for calling that off because the turn ended. There's something really wacky about that. But anyway, that means we're at the fun of production again. I move into January 45. We got a bit of a problem. Russia wants to surrender to Germany. Remember, they failed to get their chance last time. They saved up enough money so that they can do their surrender again. And Germany wants to accept. Well, unfortunately, Germany didn't get an action last time, so they have a +6. +2 brings them to +8. And they're going to jump ahead of Russia. Now, I think that's okay. I think they can accept the surrender before it's given. If they can't, that would really screw this whole situation up. But I believe they can take the pick and then apply it retroactively. If they couldn't, some other kind of attempt to tweak the game here. For example, the Allies are allowed to react to the German action by sinking in levels. Well, here I'm more certain that I'd want to switch with the Russians, but because I'm not a democracy, I'm not allowed to do that. That would be, you know, a place where the rules would kind of break down. I'm not going to even bother looking it up. I'm just going to go with it as it stands. And I guess the Germans get the first action, so the Russians don't pay first, and the Germans get to trigger an activity first. Japan was considering trying to bring a country in, but I ended up $1 short. I'll hold off another turn and try to save that extra $1 because I want to bring Mexico and Argentina in. The danger, of course, is if the U.S. gets to go, I don't get to bring Argentina in. So maybe I'm best off withdrawing something the Japanese are building. All right. Weather is really kind of hampering things. The Italians did a ground move, but their airstrike didn't get them enough of an advantage that they wanted to launch an attack. So this is a port I can support out here. So they decided instead, well, even though they got the successful ground strike, not to attack. The odds wouldn't have been good. They'll wait for more troops to move up. The Germans also did a ground move, shifting forces off the Russian line. The Russians, of course, are moving their way down for the Afghanistan war. And I chose not to do my air raids at this point, largely because, you know, maybe the weather will break. If I get late in the turn, I'll take the air action and I'll try to level Britain, largely. Over with the Japanese, again, not a lot happening. They did clear Bismarck Sea, though. A couple air units. Brits stuck around longer than they should, took more casualties than they should. I could have done a port strike over here, but I'm so outnumbered in aircraft there that it just didn't look like a good idea. And what I assume is going to happen is the U.S. Navy is going to come out in force. Maybe not in entire Navy. But the problem is, of course, if I don't send the entire thing, well, I don't want to send the entire thing because I got to protect my supply routes, right? But if I don't send the entire thing, then I end up in a position where Japan has a stronger carrier force that they could allocate against wherever else I go. Of course, that means that perhaps I lose the supply route here, and there's a lot of Japanese planes here in the Marianas. Maybe more than there should be. Looks like more than there should be. Set one of these back here. And I just don't know. I think what's going to happen is no matter what, Japan's going to have to commit to defending the Marianas if I go out and force there. So it may be safe to send everything in. On the other hand, if I don't send everything in there, I've got other things I could raid over here, for example, that I can threaten their supply routes rather than try for that big naval showdown. But I think the showdown's in my advantage. Even though the Japanese kind of want attrition, I get the numerical jump on the first strike. Maybe the Japanese should have moved their whole fleet out there. Of course, they do that, then I just ignore it and I sail out and screw their shipping everywhere. So there's just really no option that I see. The U.S. has yet even more naval power that they're putting into play that'll be coming in. And then I'm actually starting to build up against the European front. I think the game cannot end in an Allied victory, but I'm not sure Britain can fall with this amount of support in place. We'll see. Allies took a largely conservative approach, covering Bay of Biscay, Cape St. Vincent. Sailed out here, failed to find, but left a significant force behind as a reserve to react in case the Japanese do something impressive. Probably the biggest kind of controversial thing the Allies did was I used my Brazilians to airstrike into here. If that had succeeded, I might start being able to punch a hole into Argentina. Brazil's got a bigger army than Argentina and Chile combined, so and that looked appealing. And then we got kind of the worst weather you can get. Blizzard all the way down into the Mediterranean. Now, in the desert, I think it actually comes out as snow. I think blizzard drops down to snow, and may just be storm, which is actually probably worse. And that means the turn's going to be shorter than maybe I thought it would be, and probably reduces the ability of the Allies to get their convoys out everywhere they want it. One thing I've been forgetting about, Venezuela's got like well, I couldn't read, but Venezuela's got 5 oil. I thought it was 2, and we're losing focus and not able to zoom back. So I've got a lot more oil I can haul out because Britain has all of that coming to them as long as no one else economically penetrates them. And no one else really can. So there was that. Anyway, keep pushing. The Axis are taking, or took, I guess taking, we're still in the midst of it, a massive naval action. Over in the European front, everything's naval. Yeah. No, Italians did a combined, but Germans coming, actually they couldn't have, I cheated for them, I think, again. No, I took back the land move. Yeah, naval everywhere. Sub-operations over here, attempt to intercept, and it was partially successful. Oh, I didn't roll for a second round here. There might be. Yeah, I did. Okay. Partially successful here in that the British managed to catch a small fleet of slow German and Swedish ships and kind of beat them up. Didn't work out well for the Germans, obviously. Although the Brits only got a couple of ships of their own against it. They had better ships. Italians coming out here trying to hit the convoys. They fail. Sub-operations didn't really work. It's bad weather. It's hard to find each other. But here, it did work. Rain, which isn't that bad of weather because your air power still counts. The Japanese moved their entire fleet out and they got a successful hit where they got to pick the U.S. squadron task force that they hit, or box that they hit. They chose one without any air power, and they're hitting it with all their air power. These ships are technically in the battle right now, but I don't need them because the U.S. can't possibly hit. This is just going to be an airstrike on these battle wagons. And then the U.S. has to kind of decide, do they want to stick around? Because if they don't stick around, their truck fleet isn't going to be able to reinforce and come in. It'll be weaker as well. But if they do stick around, they have probably, a slight superiority in air power, but they're way behind in surface power. So it seems like a too risky a move. They'll probably just let one round of combat hit these guys, then get out of there, go to Pearl. But of course that leaves truck open to a possible port strike. Remember, the reason it didn't happen before was, and it probably should have happened this time actually. I probably should take the port strike right now, see if I can beat up those carriers before, oh no, I had to naval move, I had to move the extra carriers in. Okay, so the reason it didn't happen before was I didn't have that many carriers, and I didn't want to face the amount of planes that were coming out of truck. Now, with about parity, I'd rather not have faced them there. I'd rather try to wipe out the at-sea Navy than lose some of my planes and then have to fight this battle, perhaps at a disadvantage. So I did the right thing by not launching an about parity port strike here, and instead trying to hit these guys. I think it's at least a rational choice. I've got a combined move, but I've used all my air power. That's why I took a combined, was to get more planes out. I've used all my air power to get planes into this area. So I wanted the additional search capacity or search value to get up to the 4 level. I've got some surprise, which is why I was able to hit this, and we'll see. I should be able to maul it. Yeah, the Japanese won that one pretty handily. They lost one crappy carrier plane, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 damaged battleships. Those were all in that. And I think 3 destroyed ones. Really painful for the U.S. We cleared out of there. There is some chance of a port strike happening, so I will probably take the U.S. turn to get out of there, because I don't want to face all these planes coming in. That is too much. But I may not just retreat. That doesn't necessarily make much sense. I can probably manage a raid here. I have to run through this, but that should be easy for my carriers to protect me from. And there's also possibility of even getting into the South China Sea, I think. Right? Yeah, I can sail through the Philippines. So I'm probably going to be trying to take out some of their shipping. They no longer have anything to protect it, really. Okay, first off, the U.S. withdrew their fleet into the Marshalls and the Solomons, protecting their convoys. There's some risk. Got some carriers without planes, and there's subs and stuff like that. So there was some chance that those could get harassed. But I didn't want that happening because it is still somewhat important to keep the Carolines open. I can always base my fleet there, or I probably will base my fleet there because it's in supply. So instead of attacking out here from the Carolines, where I'd have to run the gauntlet here, I set sail with my subs and slipped them into the China Sea spaces. Now, that gave me less possible shots at attacking. I only get one round of attack possible. Oh, well, one impulse to search, right? If I succeed, I'd get to make multiple rounds of attacks, assuming I keep succeeding with the searches. But that didn't happen. I failed, as you could see, which means if the turn went on, but it didn't, I'd end up with a limited, number of chances. But as it is, the turn ended, and the U.S. Oh, I didn't do this search. Let me trigger that. I don't know if I really want to. No, I didn't want to fight there if I could help it, because there's too much of a chance of the Italian subs hitting my convoys. Likewise, I didn't particularly want to fight here, although I did actually search there. But I moved out to cover and try to kill off some of those German subs and Italian subs if they ended up being a risk. They didn't get a chance to attack in those locations, I don't think. I'm not sure. There may have been some successes here. But what's really ugly is that I moved the British fleet out to take out the German fleet. And the first thing that happened was the Germans took out the convoys. They just kept winning the surprise rolls. They took out the convoys. Then they took out most of the squadron that was here. And then they decided, that's enough chancing things, because there's a huge surface fleet out here that could light us up. We took a couple of damage, so we have something to do with our builds next turn. So I just evacuated everything, subs and all. Thought about moving everything to Bray, but the problem with that is, of course, then at risk of airstrikes. Airstrikes can't affect the subs unless I want them to. I'm not sure terribly why you'd want to include subs. They may have some small anti-air capability, but it just doesn't seem like a wise idea. And, well, I don't know. If they have anti-air, it's probably worthwhile if there's the rest of the fleet there. Anyway, that's the end of the turn. Partisan check is a 2, which is... Norway's not a risk. Yugoslavia I may have covered now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Nope, not quite. 1 still affects them. India. The Brits still have enough strength points in India. Oh, no, I was over on 2. China. China's a potential problem, but I think I've got enough. Well, maybe not. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So there's no chance in China. The risk is a 10. We're moving enough forces in that, well, we got the planes in. We haven't gotten the ground troops over there yet. Should have probably railed something in, but so there's so many things to try to keep track of that there's actually no troops there. Okay, and I guess we'll do the cleanup in the economics. The force pool additions for 45 are already, and that only really helps Germany and the US, I think. The Brits may have had a couple too, but mainly more ships for the US in terms of what's going to actually have an effect. So, they have an even bigger force pool to handle the Japanese with. As long as they're focusing on Japan, Britain's in danger, but Japan's in danger of falling as well. In terms of, there's always this chance that I get that big naval breakthrough. I tried sending some actually, the ships I tried sending to Japan ended up coming around here and helping defend in one of these locations. I think they're this squadron through the canal. So, some stuff is actually funneling its way to the west. Unfortunately, Britain, again, is not going to get any resources because they were cut off. So, they're not going to be building much, and I may want to move ships to the U.S. assuming the Germans leave these boxes and they're kind of maybe not in the best search spaces. It's hard to tell. There's a chance, see, if I try to withdraw to the US, there's a chance they get caught by the subs, and that might not be good for them. Looking at the first hard choice of this production cycle with the Japanese, I have everything sitting here. Do I pull these guys back? If so, how many? If I pull them all back, Truk becomes where the US fleet stations. If I leave a significant force there, the US probably doesn't want to put their carriers there because they'll be port struck. So I probably withdraw back to Honolulu. But the problem is then whatever I leave here isn't available to defend the Japanese coast. And the Japanese coast isn't terribly important, although whatever I have here could be port struck. It's a long distance. It's not going to be that terribly effective. But the other problem is if I return home, I owe fuel for the ships that return home. So for example, you know, if I leave the majority of my fleet out here, I probably don't have enough to defend the Japanese coast against what the US sends out there. On the other hand, I don't have, you know, this whole squadron isn't, or task force isn't doing anything at all. It's sitting out here. The US isn't going to react. Now, it could be that I get Truk out of that, and that would actually resolve a lot of problems. So it might be worth staying out there for that advantage. What I don't want to have happen is I don't want the US to be able to slip over to here, which they could do from Rabaul. And again, this whole squadron could move to Rabaul and threaten that. So I've got some real hard choices here. Do I leave a significant amount of this force here? And will that keep the US from repositioning to Truk? Is that really that important? I don't think the Truk question is that important. I think the big question that's important is how much of this fleet I want to pay refueling for. Because when I send the whole Japanese fleet out, I'm down something like 6 oil for the turn. And I've done that. Now, if I recycle them every turn, I pay that 6 oil every turn. If I leave them out there, I don't pay quite as much. A lot of my pre-turn planning was based on bringing Mexico into the war for Japan. And I ended up paying for, you know, making the bid for it. I did Argentina first because I wanted to make sure they came in before Mexico did. But then I forgot to do Mexico during the Japanese turn. I am kind of cheating and allowing them to do it in the between turn. It's just really a matter of me forgetting what's going on, and it was a lot of effort. I took a huge opportunity cost to save up the money so I could do both of them, and Argentina was the far and away the secondary choice. Mexico was the one I wanted to bring in. So since the Japanese got an impulse, they would have brought them in. They weren't, especially seeing how late in the turn things were obviously going. Anyway. The production futures make it look like the entire game's become a naval game at this point, which makes sense. I mean, the Axis have continental Europe. They're going to get North Africa. It looks pretty clear that they've got the forces in ready to take sub-Saharan Africa. With Russia coming in this way, India's going to fall. I mean, it's over. I don't know what I'm really doing except trying to see how much effort is it going to take Britain down. No supplies got through this turn. They basically had enough points to produce with their convoy, their 6 convoys, which is what they had in the damage pool. This is kind of weird because some of those points are coming from India, Australia. They can't get anything from Canada because the Canadians don't have a factory. But, right? Oh, Toronto's a factory. Shit. I haven't been counting that. Oops. I mean, I'm sure it's added in their totals, but I didn't realize. Yeah. I do realize. because they have 3 factories. And I don't know where else they could be getting a factory from. No, they have 2 over here. 1 down here. Yeah, they should have 4 factories. Maybe the chart failed me again. Canada should have a factory. Who knows, you know. Because counting from the sheets to the chart and everything, it's just really a pain in the ass. Anyway, I guess I'll keep going because I dread what I am planning on doing after this. Maybe not right after, but after. More than I dread continuing going with this. But yeah, I mean, all I'm doing is trying to recuperate the losses that I have. Now, Britain can't even refuel their ships. Japan is having trouble refueling everything. The US has enough fuel, mainly because they have the Canadian resources that they can pump down and replace the fuel that they would use otherwise. They also have fuel coming out of Venezuela and everything. So the US actually has a lot of resources available to it. But Britain can't build a damn thing. And with Russia against us, what the hell? You know, I mean, what can we possibly do? And kind of just dragging out time to see when Germany's going to make their invasion. And honestly, I don't think they're going to make it. I mean, wow. It's just a matter of I have to really neutralize the Navy in the North Atlantic to have a shot at it. Anyway, I should just wrap, but this video has gone too long to do one, and I think I'm not going to get to a point where I end up actually invading Britain before I just get so fatigued with playing. I have a huge cleanup on the works though for this. Alright, well, I'll load this up and I'll keep thinking whether I'm going to continue. I'm afraid I just don't have the heart to keep going. So, where are we? What has happened? So we got to give a wrap. The first thing is the days of decision. By being a rapper outside of all of World in Flames, it gave me some interesting opportunities. The first time I played it alone, the DoD 2, and now I'm kind of playing DoD 3, it generated some situations that I really wanted to explore in the big game. One of them was the Japanese going into the Netherlands East Indies. Another factor that really affected everything throughout the play was my inherent unwillingness to get the ball rolling. So, you know, the Japanese didn't go into China until late. Germany took France out and Britain wasn't involved in the war. Germany didn't invade Poland until after they took Russia out. A lot of interesting little things that happened there. Now, the biggest factor probably in the whole thing is that I ended up cheating in some significant ways in favor of the Axis. I think it's pretty damn hard for the Axis to get this kind of situation. I'd say well nigh impossible with decent play following the rules, you know, with players who are doing reasonable things and following the rules. So, essentially, I think I gave them a couple extra free offensive chits so that they got to run their bombers all over the place, and that allowed them to bust through in Romania a little easier than they should have been able to. Another big factor in it was I handled reserves wrong. I didn't slap them down on the board as soon as the declaration of war came out. Well, did go over here, but that hurt the Russians a lot more than it hurt the Germans. The Germans would get some extra troops that they could use to garrison conquests, etc. and some decent units that maybe if they rail up could actually do something, but for the most part they're slower units that weren't going to help a lot. But the Russians weren't able to defend their entire line, and there was this huge tract of empty territory that very easily fell. The different political options in Days of Decision, these almost intrinsically happen. Things like Argentina and Chile coming towards the Axis. How much they're worth bringing into the game, I don't know. Mexico was probably a better threat not brought into the war than it's going to be being in the war. I think it's going to get conquered by the U.S. and be extra bonus resources. Central America, do I need to go that far? I don't know. One helpful thing to taking it, it doesn't really matter. I have to ship the oil by water anyway. I'm not going to be able to get it out any other way. So I don't know how much effect that all had. My inability to really get a grasp of naval operations, and it still lasts. In this game, I can't tell how to do a multi-pronged situation, how that would develop. I'm kind of set up for it here. But I think what's going to happen is, well, you know, the U.S. is committed, the Japanese sail in and they destroy one of the U.S. fleets, and boom, now the U.S. is no longer, you know, got parity in the Pacific and they're screwed again. You know, I just feel like that's the nature of what happens if you don't get all your stacks in one place. You're fast enough that you can support each other fairly easily, so the force that's down here in the Coral Sea and the Solomons can very quickly get up to the Marshalls in the Central Pacific and affect that kind of the situations down there. And if you don't do that, well, the Japanese are more centralized. They can coordinate against you. Now, Japan, perhaps because of the Netherlands East Indies, and oh god, there was another big one. But let's go with the conquest of China, as we'll get back to it in a moment. But the Netherlands East Indies and the eventual conquest of China were able to get their whole fleet built. You know, they had more resources than they probably should have. Now, there may have been some cheating going on in China, but the big effect there is the Russians choosing the option to start the Chinese Civil War. That's one thing with Days of Decision. There are a bunch of options you never want to take. And I think one of them is you don't want to take the Chinese Civil War option as the Allies. However, here's the thing. If Russia could have won the Chinese Civil War or come to some sort of agreement with Japan after the nationalists were battered badly enough and kind of let the Japanese alone while they attacked the nationalists and then came to some kind of peace in between, something nice might have happened there. The dynamism of the three-sided game makes that more likely. Now, I think the Russians never want to pick it because they have no out if they pick it. Whereas if the Americans pick it, and they have probably a better chance of succeeding in wiping out their enemy. If the Americans pick the Civil War, then, or the Chinese, the nationalist Chinese, who are played by the Americans, they might be able to get rid of a troublesome little victory point at the end of the game type of situation. Lanchow is an objective hex, so that might swing things a little bit in favor of the Western Allies. If Japan doesn't go into China, the nationalists should be able to win the Civil War, as they did in this game, actually, before they were wiped out. So yeah, that's a major factor. Now, when I said actions you don't want to take, well, Russia doesn't want to take the Chinese Civil War because they have a way to put a halt on the Chinese Civil War. Likewise, Britain probably never wants to pick the free India option because all it does is cuts into their production for a little while. Now, eventually, it could conceivably give you an India that's free of this little minuscule rebellion option. It also gives you a political effectiveness point, but a political effectiveness point isn't worth the production for a long period of time without India. Other things that really affected this situation, hard to tell. You know, screwy stuff going on here with like you know, Hungary ending up in Italian hands, which made everything kind of difficult. Just some of the alignments that happen when you play with the DoD rules, it can be really obnoxious. This is a clear example here with Argentina in whose hands? Japan's hands, and Chile in Germany's hands, and they can't cooperate because there's no alliance there. And then like the Mexican in Japan as well. So a lot of things got us to this position. Some of them valid, some of them not. And I just wanted to kind of give a wrap up to the situation. I think there's a lot of room in a sandbox like this to really screw up. There are things, and I'll get to them more in the review, that really, really bug me about World in Flames. But I don't know if there's anything that quite manages what it tries to do anywhere near as well. The only thing that I can think of is SPI's, well, TSR SPI's European Theater of Operation, and the Decision Games branched that off. I don't know how that is. I looked at it, it looked kind of like Third Reich, but then again, so did World in Flames when I first looked at it, with more of a military emphasis, and that's really what World in Flames tries to be. Alright, well, that's the wrap. We'll move to the review segment in a little bit, but I've got to clean everything up, and I'll just put it on this same tape.